Good evening and welcome to Wilmot Township Council for Monday, April 12, 2021. On behalf of Township Council, staff, and residents, I would like to extend condolences to Her Majesty the Queen on the loss of Prince Philip. He spent an entire lifetime in dedication to his role. May he rest in peace. April is Be a Donor Month. Wilmot has one of the highest per capita rates for people who have registered to be an organ donor. When you register your consent for organ and tissue donation, you let those waiting for life-saving organ donations know that you would help them if you could. And once again, I would like to take this time to applaud those that are making the sacrifices we need to stay safe during the third wave of the pandemic. We all understand that many of us are eager to resume our normal daily lives, but it is so vitally important that we all continue to remain at home whenever possible while staying connected virtually to family and friends. Now I'll ask Councillor Gordick to read the land acknowledgement, please.
Thank you, Mayor. We acknowledge with gratitude as we gather virtually that Wilmot Township is located on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee Mississauga peoples. We also want to acknowledge the importance of the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the settlers arrived. It characterizes our collective responsibility to each other and Mother Earth. We should only take what we need, leave enough for others, and keep the dish clean. By acknowledging this covenant and the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, we are reminded of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work together as a community, and we continue down the path together in reconciliation.
Thank you, Councillor Gordick. Are there any additions to the agenda? Seeing none, is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Councillor Gordick.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, similar to the last meeting, I just wanted to reiterate that regarding the delegations that are coming this evening about the Hallman gravel pit, although there will be no decisions being made at tonight's council meeting and we are hearing delegations for the purpose of receiving information only, I would like to restate my conflict of interest so that I will not be taking part in any of the conversations on the topic that is presented this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, so noted. Okay. First item is the recommendation that the minutes of the following meetings be adopted as presented. Regular council meeting, March 22nd, 2021. That is moved by Councillor Gordick, second by Councillor Fenning. Any comments, questions, omissions, corrections? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. First item is a public meeting. This is a public meeting in respect of zone change application 0521. We will hear all interested people who wish to speak on this matter. If the decision of council is appealed to the local planning appeal tribunal, the tribunal has the power to dismiss an appeal if you do not speak at the public meeting or make written submissions before the bylaw is passed. I now declare the public meeting open. Persons attending as delegations at this meeting are required to leave their names and addresses, which will become part of the public record. And you are hereby advised that this information may be posted on the township's official website, along with your email address if provided. Mr. Martin, if you would.
This application proposes a temporary use bylaw to allow the existing home at 1708 Snyder's Road East to be retained during the construction of a new dwelling on the property. Through circulation of the application, some concerns were raised from residents in the area. One such concern was related to the private water system and the potential impact and access to Redford Drive would have on that system. Certainly those comments have been noted and the owner is aware of the concerns about that location. It is a private water system and those issues would need to be addressed prior to or through the approval of an access permit to Redford Drive. This application doesn't deal with a proposed access, it simply deals with timing of demolition of an existing home. So those details aren't something that form part of this application, but those concerns have certainly been noted. One other issue that came up was the impact of construction traffic on Redford and Alice and Deerfield. And in speaking with the applicant, they are aware of those concerns and their intention is to ensure that all construction traffic is accessed via their existing right-of-way to Snyder's. Through the issuance of a building permit, staff will ensure that adequate construction fencing is installed along Redford Drive to prevent access to Redford during construction, and ultimately only removed at such time as a residential access has been installed and occupancy is approved for the new home, at which time that fencing would be removed and residential access would be maintained to Redford Drive after an access permit has been issued for that use. Aside from that, the application again is very straightforward in what the request is and simply dealing with the timing of demolition of the existing home, and staff recommend approval.
Thank you, sir. Now, council have any questions of a technical nature? Seeing none. Before commencing with hearing from delegations, I would like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. Delegations will be allotted 10 minutes to speak and will be provided a 2-minute warning reminder when your 10 minutes is nearing completion. We also ask that you leave the meeting once your issue has been addressed. You are then welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting being webcast live via YouTube. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate muting and removal from the meeting. First, interrupting councillor, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillor, staff, or others, hate speech, or defamatory comments. I now call upon the delegations. The first delegation is Susan and David Cisco.
Hello? Yep. Hello?
Hello.
Oh, okay. Good evening. A lot of what we have written down has been addressed by Mr. Martin. We were just very concerned about the poor condition of our streets, and that we're happy to hear that you're going to be reinforcing that most of the construction will happen through Schneider's Road rather than through our subdivision. And I guess the other question we just wondered about, and maybe you can't answer it right now, is once the house is removed, will the access be eliminated as well from Snyder's Road? So that, I don't know what it's going to look like, but will anybody be able to get from Snyder's Road into our subdivision through that access?
Mr. Martin, do you have an answer? Or?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Armstrong. So the right-of-way that this property currently gains access through is not owned by them. So the provisions of that right-of-way between the owner of this property and the owner of the right-of-way. From a township perspective, we wouldn't have the opportunity to require them to remove that access.
Okay.
In speaking with the applicant, they've indicated that where the existing detached garage is located, they plan on installing a pool. So ultimately, their access from Snyder's Road through this property wouldn't be possible after the pool's installed. But certainly in terms of access from Snyder's to Redford over the right of way, that would be who can access that and how they can access would be up to the owner of that property.
Okay. All right. So really,
So 2 other points. Currently, there is the easement that Paul Knippel owns through the property on the west side of this property. And the Paul Knippel has certainly allowed pedestrian access through that easement for quite some time. But certainly previous owners have attempted to block it and fence it and otherwise frustrate pedestrian traffic. And we just weren't too sure whether some sort of fence, even a short 4-foot high chain link fence, could be erected along the west side of this subject property adjacent to Paul Knippel's right of way, just so that it was delineated. And the last point, and Andrew has mentioned about the water main, and we just like to support Paul Knippel and his concerns for the protection of the existing private water main that serves much of Petersburg, and which is located, as you've mentioned, in the right of way for Redford Drive. And I think generally where the proposed driveways can be located. And if there's any sort of civil engineering solution that can be made available, and just to ensure that any costs would be borne fully by Mr. Creason, and that the township would ensure that all the required work is done and inspected to meet township engineers, if the water main needs to be lowered or some sort of frost protection to make sure that it isn't damaged. So those are our comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Those concerns are noted, and I'm sure that staff are making sure that things are looked at for that. Thank you. Next delegation is Paul Knippel.
Cheryl had a question.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Gordick first.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong, to the manager of planning, Mr. Martin. Just to sort of answer, can you answer a little bit of what Mr. Sisko asked about with regards to the water mains or anything like that, that just sort of can respond to that a little bit, just to kind of alleviate some of the concerns that we have?
Through your Mayor Armstrong, so with respect to the water main, it is privately owned, although it's located within the township right of way. Ultimately, it's maintained and owned privately. In speaking with the applicant in this case, he's indicated his willingness to work with the owner of the distribution system to ensure that if there's any modifications required or additional frost protection required after an access is constructed, he's certainly willing to do that at his own cost. And ultimately, would be my understanding, and Mr. Mullenhouse may be able to comment further, but through the approval of an access permit, ultimately we would need to see that those conditions have been satisfied, so that we can ensure that through that approval of the access, that any impacts on that water main are dealt with appropriately at that time. So again, that's a little bit outside of my area of expertise, and perhaps if you require further comment, Mr. Mullenhouse might be able to offer that.
Nothing further, Councillor Gordick? No. Okay. Okay, so Mr. Knippel, you're up, sir.
Good evening.
Welcome, Paul.
Thank you for letting me speak regarding the zone change 05/21. My name is Paul Knippel, owner and operator of Knippel Water Supply Incorporated, which is a non-municipal year-round residential system governed under Regulation 170. The plan of this subdivision approved under Section 28 of the Planning Act, April 28, 1964, was registered 10:10 a.m. May the 4th, 1964 as Plan 1150. This was done by my father, Harry Knippel Jr. I have reviewed the plan, and there's a 12-inch reserve along Redford Drive, as well as there are 2 other locations on Plan 1150. As part of the subdivision agreement with Wilmot Township Council, at the time my father was required to put a community water system to supply water for 44 lots in Plan 1150, which you did. As time went on, there was residents that had homes on Snyder's Road. This was called Highway 78B. At the time, they had problems with their shallow wells being contaminated with bacteria. My father and township council, I believe ward councilor at the time was Martin Feeney, worked together to extend the water line to the south side of Redford Drive based on the 12-inch reservoir reserve in place along Redford Drive. The reserve would not allow for further driveways and vehicle traffic over the water line. Allowing a driveway entrance to Redford Drive now would mean excavations would eliminate ground cover over the water line. Heavy equipment traffic will affect the water line as well. And I'm not prepared to take this liability. After the Walker disaster, I had a conversation with Mr. McCraft in his office regarding the water supply in Petersburg, and offered to supply him with drawings indicating the approximate location of water lines, and he told me he did not want them. So at that time, after that response, I had to wonder if Petersburg was part of Wilmot Township, where everything is revolved around Baden and Lambert. I would also like to comment after emails back and forth with Mr. Jeff Munoz. Jeff informed me he forwarded my concerns to Andrew of Planning and Brian of Engineering. Within 3 hours, I received a call on my phone, and my partner answered it as I was in the doctor's office, and the owner, Mike, of the property in question was not very pleasant with her. I returned his call, and he was not very pleasant with me. I was advised that I'll have to talk to his lawyer. The property in question has always used the right-of-way for access to that property for as long as I can remember. And I am 71 years old, and I went to the school with the family members that grew up in that house. The original right-of-way was right beside the church, and my father was given equal amount of land from the Emmanuel Church, who had the right-of-way in its current location. This was done in 1963. So my concern is safe supply of water for all residents of the system is top priority. Maybe the township would like to take over the operation of the system and make all necessary changes, as I'm not willing to take on this responsibility. Please note, if I must isolate the water line for any reason, will affect 15 service connections, homes, local church, U-Haul business and its apartments, as well as the local post office. It will become a great liability. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from council or staff? Okay. Councillor Fenning?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Just wondering if staff could comment on potential ways that I recognize that the discussion tonight and this proposal or this application is for allowing them to construct a home prior to demolishing the existing one. Since the subject of the water line has been raised and the eventual conversation will happen that they do want to move access to Redford Drive, perhaps if staff could comment, if staff are willing to comment tonight on steps that can be taken to protect the water main in that eventuality, and how that would be done.
Thank you. Who wishes to respond there? Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. I think if a detailed response is requested at this point, I defer to Mr. Mullenhouse, and looks like he is here to answer that question.
Mr. Mullenhouse?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Armstrong. I believe Mr. Martin has already, generally speaking, answered the question. I don't think we'd get into too much detail in terms of what the review process and the design process would require. We would need more information, certainly from the owner of the system, the operating system, before we can make any sort of detailed, I guess, solutions or come to any sort of detailed solutions. At the end of the day, for an access permit, there's multiple authorities that we would have to accommodate, we'll say, or seek approvals through sort of supplementary or sub approvals through, and it could be something as simple as hydro, or it could be something as simple as gas as well. And there are various different design solutions that would have to, be put in place. And in many cases, that does come down to the operating authority and what their requirements might be through that process. So, it's not probably the direct answer you're looking for, but at the end of the day, with any operating authority that we might approve a driveway or an access or something to that effect, we would have the operating authority at the table as part of the discussion. So that's probably the best I can give you at this point. That this the operating authority for this system would certainly be party to the discussions as the application moves forward.
Go ahead, Councillor Fanning.
Thank you, Director Mullenhouse. That in essence does answer. I mean, for me, I think hearing the concerns from Mr. Knipfel, the main thing is that he needs to be at the table when the solutions are being discussed and ensure that it works, because obviously none of us wants to see the water compromised for that town, that area of the town.
Councillor Gordick.
Thank you, through Mayor. And that was basically what I was going to reiterate with Councillor Fanning has said, just to ensure that Mr. Knipfel and the other parties that would be necessary to grant that access to Redford Road, so that all of the conditions that we need to ensure that the water stays safe for the residents of Petersburg and that quite large subdivision. So just to ensure that nothing, whatever we can do to help mitigate any concerns that happen.
Thank you. I'm sure that staff will make sure that things are done right. No further questions. The next delegation is Phil Wetland.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, welcome.
Thanks for allowing me to speak tonight, as well as the other delegations from the neighborhood here. Sue and Dave Sisko did a real good job of outlining some of my concerns as well. I live across the street from them at 11 Alice Crescent. My main concern really was for the construction access. So I think those, the manager of planning, I believe it was, sort of addressed that with the fencing and the access from Schneider's Road. I have a young daughter who's 10, and there's some other kids in the neighborhood that bike a lot. And so we were just mainly concerned about all these big machines coming through the neighborhood and things like that. But it sounds like that's been addressed. So I think there's nothing further for me tonight. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Phil. And seeing nothing further. I hereby declare the public meeting is closed.
Sarah, you need to ask if any other person present.
Oh. And before we do that, is there anyone else present who wishes to address this subject?
No delegations have their hands raised.
No. Okay. Thank you. So declare the public meeting closed. Any comments? None. The recommendation that council approves zone change application 0521 by Michael Sheridan and Jessica Katana, and to permit as a temporary use 2 dwellings for a period of up to 18 months, subject to the following: that the implementing bylaw specifically limited limit occupation to only one dwelling at any time. So that is moved by Councillor Fisher, Councillor Gerber. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. So the next item is a presentation for the Mike Shout Wetlands Preserve. Mr. Okrafka.
Good evening. Excuse me. Ms. Jackson and Mr. Kelly are also going to turn their cameras on for this report. It's exciting to be able to highlight this report to you. And I think we're all probably looking forward to hearing Mr. Holst speak a lot more than you're looking forward to hearing me speak. But I'll just briefly summarize that it seems just yesterday, but it was actually the fall of 2019 when Mike Scout presented in the council chambers, back when presentations were live and in person, his vision for the 55-acre parcel the township owns of floodplain along the Nith River, just off of Smiths Creek Drive in New Hamburg. Over the last year and a half, the 18 months, Mr. Scout and his design team, including Mr. Holst, have been working away, preparing designs, done a number of technical studies, including mapping the elevations using a drone, digging some test pits to determine soil stratigraphy and groundwater levels, and working extensively with GRCA and discussing with them and with various township departments on our areas of expertise, and coming up with a concept plan that they'll be presenting to you tonight. Ms. Jackson, Mr. Kelly, myself, and the CAO have been working with Mr. Scout and his team and are happy to answer any questions. Our recommendations to you tonight are that you do endorse the concept presented by Mr. Scout and Mr. Holst, so that they can proceed with the regulatory approvals from GRCA for the design. Also that you would approve the immediate implementation of stage 1. Mr. Scout has negotiated with Forests Ontario and with GRCA to plant approximately 4,000 trees on site this spring to get the reforestation areas started, and also to provide long-term, as those trees grow, a bit of a nursery for the site as well, that trees can be transplanted then as they grow from there to other sites on the property. And then the third recommendation is obviously that township staff be directed to continue to work with the design team and to report back to council at necessary intervals relative to staging of construction costs and implementation. Again, Ms. Jackson, Mr. Kelly, myself are happy to answer any questions that you might have, but I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing Mr. Holst tell us the details of this concept for the lands.
Very good, thank you. So we just need to hear from Mr. Holst.
There, am I on?
You are on. Welcome, Phil.
Well,
we're looking forward to this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mayor Armstrong, councilors and staff. It's terrific to be in front of you again after what seems like an awfully long time. I remember well our first meeting about Mike Scout's proposal and this project. And as Harold was saying, we've been doing a lot of homework to prepare for this. So I understand you've seen the concept, you've seen the design, and basically what it is a creative way to turn bare farmland or any kind of bare land into what I would consider a form of natural infrastructure. The first priority of this project is to take a bare parcel of deforested floodplain beside the Nith River and create a diverse form of natural habitat. This will greatly increase the biodiversity of insects, invertebrates, reptiles, amphibians, birds, mammals, plants, trees, shrubs, etc. And I must say this location is a very unique one in the sense that it's not very often you get this much land that has basically a blank canvas with which to work on. The second priority is, as you've noted before, to plan and develop this as a carbon sink, something that's very important in today's world. Third priority, of course, is to construct a trail route that provides, first and foremost, an educational opportunity for the public, along with the recreational ability to hike on a large amount of area. So this is, I think, a pretty good way to increase the diversity of your trail system in Wilmot Township. The design showcases, first of all, a large amount of pollinative planting. I estimate it's approximately 10 acres of your 55-acre lot. And I would say that 10 acres of created pollinative habitat would be a large amount of pollinative area in this part of the countryside. This type of habitat would greatly increase the amount of bees, insects, butterflies, all different forms of pollinators. And whenever you have that type of life form, you also have a larger volume of songbirds and other bird life and mammal life that follow that cycle of, if there's a lot of insects, there's more life of other forms. Created wetlands are the other form here that you'll see on your design. And this site, although it has a very gentle grade, does provide some really good, unique opportunities for wetland restoration or creation. The land has a fairly high water table and lends itself well to this type of construction. As Harold mentioned, we did a number of test holes back in the fall, and that's how we determined the water table and the type of soil levels, how much topsoil you have, that yes, there's clay in this that we can use, and various amount of gravel and stone that can be used on the project as well. No materials need to be brought in. Everything can be sourced right on site, which is really wonderful. The design also showcases a large amount of reforestation. And by that, I mean seedlings. As Harold mentioned, 4,000 seedlings going in later on this month is what the plan is with GRCA. And again, that's to show that this project is moving forward. The other part of the design is to show areas where seedlings and tall stock trees, that being mostly deciduous and some coniferous, that are 5 to 6 feet in height and generally planted bare root or some potted. But the idea is to get an established wildlife corridor back along parallel to the Nith River, to join up to the woodlot on the north end of your property, to follow over to where the railway track is, to create, again, as I say, a wildlife corridor that follows up the drain as well and is intersected by these various sections of wetlands. So the trails are designed to take full advantage of all of this natural regenerated vegetation and landscape. The main idea is to get hikers an opportunity to have more of an intimate interaction with nature. And that's why you'll see some of the trail follows right through the water of the wetlands, mostly along the edges, sometimes through the deeper sections, but basically to provide for the public to actually look out and see what's really going on. But they can be designed in such a way that they have the least amount of interference with wildlife as well. One question that was posed to me in the past was, how can you prevent or reduce the amount of interference to wildlife? Well, in this area, there is no wildlife to speak of on the site. Once you create all of this habitat, you have wildlife of various forms on the entire site. So I guess no matter where you would put a trail or how you would position it, some wildlife interference will occur. But the trade-off is that the intimate interaction of the public with nature, especially in a highly urbanized area, is, I think, a fair trade-off. And the other part of this concept, as I mentioned earlier, is that it's what I would call a natural infrastructure project, in that the watershed feeding this stormwater management pond and surrounding 55 or 50 acres or so of new habitat drains a 260-acre watershed, all of which is urbanized a portion of New Hamburg. Terrific example and opportunity to take runoff 360 days of the year, whenever there is runoff, and incorporate it through this property to, number one, slow down the flow of water in a way that is not destructive, allow this runoff to get back into the water table, and take a longer period of time to get out to the Nith River. Because of the slope of the land, there's no danger of water backing up onto anybody's property. And the benefits of doing this is that we showcase to other municipalities and other urban areas different ways that you can actually take your storm runoff and put it to really good use, creating and supporting a wild area that has public access, and at the same time increase the water table, cool water down that enters the river, reduce the amount of nutrients in that runoff, and create wildlife habitat at the same time. Also, this project would provide a fair amount of public involvement when it comes to public tree planting days with various groups that are in Wilmot Township that I think are looking for other areas to be a part of. And but that's essentially what this project is: a large, natural, urban infrastructure that would have public access to natural area that actually blends into the surrounding landscape. So that's it. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Phil. Comments, questions? Councillor Gordick?
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong, Mr. Holtz. Thank you for explaining the project. I'm very excited to see it come to fruition. I'm glad also at the end of your presentation that you mentioned working with other groups. I've had some people reach out to me from our Let's Tree Wilmot group wanting to know how they could be involved.
Great.
So that's good to hear. I believe also that the Horticultural Society is also interested in working with you. I just haven't actually had a connection. I've just heard, but I have had two people from Let's Tree Wilmot reach out to me and ask to be involved. So perhaps maybe I can send details to you of their contact. So just to keep them in the loop, perhaps if there's, as you said, the tree planting days for them to get involved with. Further to that, I just have a quick question because I love the lookouts and stuff like that. Is there, because you said they go through the water, the trails, are they, I'm assuming that they're going to be some sort of stable walking boardwalk type idea. Is that correct?
Yes, Councillor.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right, Councillor Gordick. They would be boardwalks and elevated off the ground. And I was going to mention that earlier, but I thought I wanted to see if anybody would pick up on that because we know we're building on a floodplain on a river that's a bit flashy and you do have flooding issues. And but the reason I did that is because we feel it's imperative that the largest percentage of this property has elevated boardwalk on it with railings for the sake of being able to, number one, have access to this land for a larger period of the year, because as you can well imagine, if it's flooding sometimes during the period when the water is coming back down, if the trails were all on the ground, you would have to wait quite a while to get back on the trails, whereas the boardwalks maybe give us a few more extra weeks of use during a year, depending on how much rain we have or snow melt. And the other thing is that the fact that we would like to put up a boardwalk that's approximately 8 feet wide with railings is that it helps to reduce the amount of potential interference with nature off to the side by keeping hikers within a designated trail. Plus, with the extra height, you get to overlook what sometimes would be hard to see, because in summertime when everything's growing, plants would be taller. In the wintertime, of course, things would be lower. And yes, I'd very much like to meet all the different groups that would be interested in being involved in this project.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. So can I just ask then, just for clarification, Mr. Holtz, the red lines, and so is that all going to be boardwalk, or will there be some sort of natural trails as well?
We're thinking on the higher ground, potentially everything on like a trail on the ground. But as the elevation of the landscape starts to drop down, it makes more sense as we're getting closer to those water features to have elevated boardwalks at different heights, and all of them slope so that they're available for wheelchair accessibility, able for people to pass easily between each other, and with various spots for people to sit down and rest or relax. So it's not like an endurance race to get through it. Plus the two loops are essentially for, maybe there are times when hikers maybe only have a short amount of time from the time they're ready to go to work to do a walk, maybe not the whole thing. And as you pointed out, the lookouts, two really great locations to look out over the river, to maybe provide hikers or people on the trail an opportunity to get a little bit of private time, and for people who just want to get through the trail to be able to do so without everybody having to go by, people who want a little more privacy. Any other questions? Councillor Fenning?
I believe Councillor Fisher's hand was up before
Yes.
mine. So I'll wait my
Sorry,
turn.
Councillor Fisher, sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. This is such an amazing and unique project that really citizens are going to enjoy for years and years. And full kudos to Mike for all his foresight and his generosity in this project, and to you, Phil, and the township staff. I know a lot of hard work went into it, and certainly the trails are being used extensively in Wilmot. The one concern I had was Councillor Gordick kind of shared it too, is it's right beside the Nith River. I've seen at Holland Landing 30-foot sections of asphalt being swept away. So what type of or how would you secure boardwalks that are getting close to the river when there is major flooding?
Well, one of the things that we've considered is that my original plan that I submitted to your staff was that the trails were closer to the river, and it was decided to pull them back a bit. The beauty of your location is that when a flood comes through, and especially if there's ice and logs that are coming down the river, the main force of the water is straight down the river and on the other side of the river. It appears that on your property, water backs up, and if there's ice and debris, it tends to float in. And that's what I've learned from other people who've been around that area for a long time. And I also noted on your side of the property next to the railway track, there's a chain link fence that I think Glenn Bender had installed about 15 or so years ago, and it's still in great condition. So that would indicate to me that there should be very little issue with high water speed and debris coming down to damage anything. Plus the style of boardwalk that Mike is talking about is a very high quality one. And also having the boardwalks kind of parallel the wetlands, the boardwalks kind of, if you will, flow with the flow of water. There are some of the trail that kind of would act like a dam effect, but would be minimal. So that would make a difference. Plus the area on both sides of the wetlands would have some kind of rise and fall to them, because that's where some of the excavated material would go. So the landscape itself would do a lot to protect the boardwalks.
Okay, Councillor Fanning?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Mr. Holst, you've seen me smiling the whole time. I'm pretty excited about this. As somebody who lives on a portion of the banks of the river and very intimately experiences impacts of flooding, Councillor Fisher's questions are certainly warranted. But I also, having my farm actually has river on three sides, yes, the east, south, and west. And so we get an opportunity to see how the river flows and how the ice flows into the fields and where it does. And so your explanation certainly makes a lot of sense, if I dare say it holds water. This is really wonderful. I have a question about the schedule of work. Will the excavation, some of the excavations be done before the tree planting? I believe it's the seedlings you were talking about. Will some of the excavation for the water areas be done before that happens?
No, the way the landscape lies, there's opportunity to start the tree planting right away without waiting for the excavation. There's so much area for excavation and moving excavated material that we could proceed with some of the permanent tree planting right away. Part of the objective to that is, first of all, to show that there's action happening here, so that you folks can see that this project is moving forward. Secondly, the sooner those trees get in the ground, the quicker we'll have a tree cover, and also some trees to move to other sites. We will be getting and purchasing other trees as the project moves forward. But in these locations that are marked for reforestation, there is no need for that land for excavating out wetlands or placing spoil. So it might as well get started on it right away. And the trees are available, and the government had also provided great funding for this sort of planting. I believe the way the federal government is looking at it is they'd like to plant 2 billion trees across Canada. So this project qualified for involvement in that, which covered about 75% of the cost. So nothing like getting right at it. And I'm glad you're excited about the project. I am too. I think we all are.
Well, we all certainly are looking forward to it very much so, yes. And I think the entire community is as well. So thank you very much, Phil. Are there any other questions? Any other comments?
Mayor Armstrong, may I make one more comment?
You certainly may, sir.
I wanted to take this time to acknowledge the township for being willing to go beyond status quo. I've worked with quite a few landowners over the years on various conservation projects. And the big thing is you can have all the money and desire and plants and everything you want, but if you don't have a willing participant as a landowner, you really don't have a project. And as I said in the beginning of my presentation, this site is a very high quality site for conservation. It meets all the benefits that we're looking for these days. And I just leave you with one thought, and that is that because our country is becoming more urbanized, that I think it's even more essential that we have more natural areas within easy reach of residents, and some who would never even need to jump in a car to get to it. And I think that's what this opportunity you folks have provided for all of us really speaks to. So thank you all for your leadership on this. That's what makes the project work. So thank you.
Thank you, Phil. We appreciate your comments. And yes, we do like to be leaders in things, and hopefully our example will spread.
Yes.
And there's no further comments. We have a recommendation that council endorse the conceptual design presented by Mike Scout and his wetlands designer, Phil Holst, thereby allowing him to proceed with obtaining the necessary regulatory approvals for the design of the Mike Scout Wetlands Preserve. That council support the immediate implementation of stage 1, being the planting of approximately 4,000 trees in the reforestation areas as per the collaboration between Mr. Shout, GRCA, and Forest Ontario, and that staff be directed to continue to provide assistance as required to advance the design and approvals in accordance with Township Official Plan and Wilmot Trails Master Plan, and report back to council upon receipt of the necessary approvals with a report on the full staging of construction estimated cost, and implementation plan. That is moved by Councillor Fenning and Councillor Hallman. All in favor? That is carried. So thank you again, Phil. I appreciate that. And thank you to Mike if he is listening in.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, I would like to advise that a change in order has been decided on with the agenda this evening. We have had several delegations for an item that is not on the agenda to allow for council and staff to deal with items listed on the agenda in a timely fashion. The delegations will be moved to the end of the agenda following the announcements. The delegations have been previously advised of this change. We are now on to the consent agenda. If members of council have any questions and want to remove an item from the consent agenda, please indicate so now, as we will not take questions on consent items unless the items are requested to be removed to the regular agenda. Councillor Fenning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I'd like to ask for the castle report and the statement of operations to be pulled, please.
That shall be done. That will be moved to be taken on after the consent agenda is approved. Are there any other comments or anything on the consent agenda? Okay, the recommendation that, make sure we got this out of there. That reports numbers COR 2021-014, CK. What's that?
Not the castle. Go right to ILS 2021-10. The castle has been removed from the consent agenda as well.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Okay, so, and ILS 2021-10, ILS 2021-09, and ILS 2021-11 be approved. That is moved by Councillor Fisher and Councillor Gordick. All in favor? That is carried. Okay, so we will be dealing with the statement of operations. Now I just have to find it.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, I'd ask that Deputy Treasurer Mr. Romani outline the report.
Very good. I'm just locating it here. Go ahead, Ashton.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. This report outlines the first quarter statement of the financial operations for the township. As a whole, from the general levy perspective, the net effect is 21.3% compared to 28% in 2020. As noted in the report, perhaps the most material impacting item is when we look from a year-over-year difference is the Wilmot Recreation Complex revenues and expenditures. With COVID-19 having its impact on the expanded facility closures and reduced programming, has certainly influenced both the revenue and expenditures over the Q1 period. As also noted in the report, the township's position was not significantly influenced by COVID-19, as the 2021 operating budget considered its impacts in several areas. So future quarterly updates that we do outline will outline any significant deviations. And at this time, I'm here to answer any questions.
So we will entertain questions. Councillor Fenning.
Well, thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. Mr. Romani actually outlined the things that I was wanting to just highlight for the community to just be aware of, you know, the expected expenditures and incomes are definitely impacted in some ways due to the pandemic. And I think that it's important for the community to have that highlighted. So thank you.
Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the mayor. I was going to send an email earlier, and I apologize for not getting a chance to do that. But one of the things that is on the agenda for this evening is the discussing about dog licenses here and our fees with that. So I did want to just bring that up to see if I've noticed some other municipalities have reviewed their dog licenses and are actually removing them. And I just didn't know when, I just had a question, when the last time Wilmot Township reviewed this process. I don't know if we have any details on that.
Mr. Kelly.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Armstrong, I can let Mr. Romani or Ms. Middleholtz clean up anything that I might misspeak on. But yeah, we do review dog tag fees as part of the annual update of our fees and charges bylaw. A few years ago, I want to say 2, the fee was adjusted. The goal of it is that the fees that we're collecting through dog tags help to offset the costs of animal control throughout the township, which is handled by our municipal law enforcement department. So I guess any modifications to that, or if you're speaking to the potential elimination of that sort of fee, would need to be picked up by the general tax base, meaning that all ratepayers throughout the municipality would be covering the cost of animal control, which technically is benefiting the dog owners within the community. So our perspective on it is that the dog tag program is a fair allocation of costs to maintain adequate animal control for the municipality. And as noted, it's reviewed every year as part of the fees and charges bylaw update.
Thank you. That definitely clarifies my question. So thank you for that.
Ms. Middleholtz, you have a comment?
Thank you, through Mayor Armstrong. Just further to the Director of Corporate Services comments. At the time that we did that more extensive review, the only local municipality that was doing it at the time was East Shore Tavistock. But the next time that we do some sort of a review, we can include a more broad review of the other municipalities that are now including that.
Okay, thank you. Is that it, Councillor Hallman? Okay, Councillor Gordick.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. Not a big deal because it's not a huge amount, but I'm assuming this might go through Ms. Middleholtz or perhaps Ms. Merritt if she's attending this evening. I realize that there's a slight increase, assuming if we look at a quarter would be 25%, that animal control and municipal enforcement was at 28%. Could some of that be explained with COVID concerns, or is there something else that would make it a little bit higher for this particular quarter? Again, not a huge impact. I just was wondering if that might have something to do with the raised cost, to do with bylaw enforcement with COVID.
Mr. Kelly, you had your hand up to respond.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think it would have to do mostly with timing of when we pay for our animal control third-party contract that we pay out. It's an annual fee that's paid to a third party. So based on whether that was paid in the first quarter or partway into the second quarter last year, it would just be a timing issue. I didn't see anything significant that would be driving the costs outside of that.
Okay, thank you. See no further questions on the statement of operations. A motion to receive. The Councillor Fenning, Councillor Gordick, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next is the Quarterly report from the castle. Ms. Locke.
Through you, the Mayor, was there a question specific to my report, or would you like me to highlight?
To highlight for me, please.
Certainly. So the quarterly report representing January, February, March shows you sort of the operations of the museum, dealing with an early closure, as you would note, for all of us in mid-December, which greatly affected the operation. And we did the best that we could, an incredible amount of work that we've been working on behind the scenes to keep the museum current. A lot of initiatives behind the scenes with the various committees as well. You would note, particularly with Heritage Wilmot, on doing a virtual Heritage Day, and also working very heavily with grant applications and looking ahead for 2021 as we try to plan events for the museum in a very different environment now. If there's any questions or something specific that any of the councillors have, I'd be happy to answer.
Councillor Fenning.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. The question goes more to the Director of Information Services but it's listed in the Castle report, which was why I asked for it to be pulled. We've had a few informal inquiries as well as some more formal inquiries about the progress on the consultation with First Peoples Group. And so if the clerk could potentially just give us an indication of when we can expect next steps and to see some progress publicly on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Ms. Middleholtz.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Armstrong. Public engagement on the Prime Minister's path will be getting underway in the coming weeks. If I were to, I can't say for sure, but I'd say probably 4-ish weeks. What we can expect is a broad-reaching online engagement, an educational component, and opportunities for focused conversations with Wilmot residents. I know a lot of people are eager to be given timelines and more exact details, and I wish I had them for you. First Peoples Group have been very busy learning about Wilmot, the history of the Prime Minister's path, the history of Sir John A. Macdonald's statue, and learning who the local groups and individuals are who have already voiced their interests in being part of the consultations. These actions take time, and from my perspective, we want them to take time to ensure these foundational steps are being completed thoroughly. These consultations are so important to council, staff, and the public. We all want to feel good about this process and know that the outreach strategy is the best it can be. A media release is actually expected to be circulated next week to provide an update, and an inclusion and diversity divisional update will now be included as part of, my voice is going, as part of the Information and Legislative Services quarterly report, which will be presented to council on April 26th. There is a brief update on the website where we created a Prime Minister's Path consultation page that residents can subscribe to for updates. As well, if you are on social media and you follow us on Twitter and Facebook, updates will be provided there when available. And also if anybody does have any other questions, they're more than welcome to send me an email. Does that satisfy your question, Councillor Fenning?
Sorry, thank you.
Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the mayor. It's really great to get that update into the process unfolding here. The one element that I guess my question is more for the CAO. I just wanted to know who is, how many staff members do we have on the committee?
There are 3 members.
Okay, does that include yourself?
I'm an observer and when I need to be. So yes, you could add my name, but I'm there. But I'm very much relying and seeing the resources from those individuals. But that's where it is at this moment.
Will you be attending the next meeting?
If the members are looking for that support, then I certainly would be there. Yes.
I think so. With the importance of this in our community, would be great to have you attending those meetings. With the further to the transparency, and as Councillor Fenning had mentioned, the importance of the community's interest and engagement in this project. It would be nice to see social media and more detailed support roll out, Mr. Whittington, if possible. That when it's really positive to see that we've had in this report mentioned that there's been one meeting, and it would be great to have that communication going out to the community that whenever these meetings occur, that these positive steps are happening, and while it may seem to the public that it's been not active, while it has been active, the staff are meeting and these pieces are going. So it would be nice. I would support more public engagement, more transparency for the public to know as these very positive and productive conversations move forward with the First Peoples group. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's no further questions for Ms. Locke. Okay, so the recommendation that the Castle Kilbride activity report for the months of January, February, and March 2021 be received for information purposes. That is moved by Councillor Hallman, Councillor Fenning. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next item is from Parks and Facilities. Ms. Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. This report was one that was prepared with the assistance of our Development Services Department, and Mr. Martin is going to lead council through the details.
Perfect. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong. So before us here is a recommendation to award the tender for the design of the enhancements to the Nith River Trail in downtown New Hamburg to WSP Canada Inc. The staff from multiple departments reviewed the proposals received by five consulting firms. And ultimately, after having reviewed the details, examples of previous work, and the detailed work plan and cost proposals, the group unanimously has suggested that WSP Canada would be the appropriate firm to lead us forward in this design process. Council is aware that the township received funding through the Rural Economic Development Fund, which will pay for a significant portion of the design work for this project, and additional funds, approximately $100,000, would remain for construction. Staff aren't aware of what the cost to do the work will be at this point, and certainly the design process will dictate what funds are required, and moving forward from there, the timing for construction will be determined. Staff are here to answer any additional questions that the council may have.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the mayor. The only one I have is a very lighthearted celebration from a local community member who asked me if I would read their comment this evening. And they are, I should just call it up here. So they are in great support of this and looking forward to strolling the trails and enjoying the waterways along Wilmot. And that perhaps Wilmot Township will be recognized on the map and we can draw Bridgerton series to here, as they love the term promenade, as it is referenced in Bridgerton. So there you all go, that we have some very exciting Wilmot residents looking forward to this. So thank you for staff's hard work, and looking forward to this continuing.
Thank you, Councillor Hallman. Councillor Fenning.
Well, that was, sorry, through you, Mayor Armstrong, that was a way better comment. I was just going to say that this part of the downtown core is certainly well used, and upgrades to it will certainly be valuable.
Thank you. Councillor Gordick.
This is more just through you, Mayor Armstrong. Just more about the design of it. Will there be, so for example, in Kirkpatrick Park, they lost the lookout that used to be there. So I'm just wondering, will there be any sort of design options for adding, especially during some of the flooding that particular area gets? Will there be some sort of addition or taking into account that flood to raise some of the areas? And would there potentially be a new lookout that we lost from Kirkpatrick Park that I know a lot of people like to use?
Yeah, through Mayor Armstrong.
Yes.
Certainly, we have given suggestions as to the scope of the design, and we're hoping for the leadership of a qualified consulting firm to look at what would be best for this area. So we have our opinions, but we're also looking highly towards them to indicate, what ultimately should be here. The scope of the project involved enhancement to both the upper and lower segments of this walkway, and also did include a request to consider enhancements to the connection of the existing walkway that leads out to Huron Street. And ultimately, that's somewhat of a lookout there, but to broaden that and kind of open it up towards the downtown core. So that was certainly a suggestion within the scope of the project. And we're certainly hoping that the WSP will come up with some creative solutions for the entire segment.
So just to follow up for you, Mayor, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's really just because that was one of my favorite things to do when I went for a walk, was to sit on that wooden lookout that used to be in Kirkpatrick Park at the far end of the parking lot. And when it sort of disappeared, it was something that you just couldn't see, because it was lovely to look out just that little bit further over to the river and be still safe in comparison to the rocks that can get a bit slippery that people try to climb over across the neck. So it was just a suggestion, or maybe perhaps put in the back of your mind kind of thing, if there was something back towards the Kirkpatrick Park end versus the Huron end of the promenade. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. Seeing none further comments or remarks. So, recommendation that WSP Canada Inc. be awarded a contract for design of the downtown New Hamburg Nith River Promenade rehabilitation as per the proposal received March 19, 2021 for the bid price excluding HST of $54,640 plus an allowance for provisional engineering of $4,850. That is moved by Councillor Fisher, seconded by Councillor Hallman. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next item is the Sand Hills Road multi-use trail contract.
I'll let Mr. Martin also speak to this one. He's a fabulous partner for our department, and I'll let him do the explanation here.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Your Mayor Armstrong. The report here before council deals with the phase 2 of the Baden Hills Trails project. The report outlines the work that's been completed to date with respect to the trails on the Baden Hills property, the parking lot, and setting the stage for the multi-use trail connection that this contract considers. In December of last year, staff provided a report to council, an update on the project to indicate some of the increased costs that have come through the design and engineering solutions that weren't available when the preliminary cost estimates were established. And certainly this provides an important connection to the active transportation network that exists along Gingrich Road, is planned along Snyder's Road, and ultimately links this property to New Hamburg in the Wilmot Recreation Complex. The report outlines the costs of the tender costs that were received from the various bidders. One of the items that came through the design process was whether there'd be an opportunity to collaborate with multiple departments to provide the resources necessary to service the Public Works operations yard through the inclusion of an underground duct to provide the capacity for future fiber servicing. Certainly the ability to do that along with this project, as opposed to taking up the road or infrastructure in the trail at a later date, certainly is more effective to do that at this point. And those costs were included within the proposal as a provisional item. Corporate Services has provided a funding source to allow that to proceed through the 2021 COVID-19 Recovery Fund. It is requested those funds be utilized to allow the ductwork to be installed as part of this project. Ultimately, the proposal is, or the recommendation rather, is to award the contract to 5 Star Paving of Cambridge. MTE Consultants is the consultant who is dealing with both design and construction management, and they reviewed the tender submissions and contacted the references from 5 Star Paving and suggested that they would be appropriate to see this project through, and staff are certainly excited to work with them and see this additional trail connection realized in Baden.
Thank you. Councillor Fisher.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong. I really love this whole project. We're basically getting a 3-for-1 deal here with a new sidewalk between Snyder's and Gingrich, which is really nice. Sidewalk from Gingrich up to the trail, and then the fiber optics part. And I guess you could actually say it's a 4-for-1 deal because it also connects Gingrich Road. So and you can see how much use the sidewalk on Gingrich Road gets. So I think this all around is going to really, really get used a lot. So.
I agree, Councillor Fisher. Hearing people who are discovering the trails on the hill, so I think there's a lot of people looking forward to that additional access. So, thank you, Councillor Fenning.
I think through you, Mayor Armstrong, I think everybody's very well aware of how I feel about trails development and increased access to the trails. So I'm delighted to see this moving forward.
Good, thank you. So no further questions or comments. Recommendation that RFT 2021-10 be awarded to 5 Star Paving Cambridge Inc. of Cambridge, Ontario for the construction of the Sandhills Road multi-use trail as per their bid submission dated March 19th, 2021 in the amount of $447,579.86 plus HST. That is moved by Councillor Fenning, Councillor Gordick. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next item is correspondence item. And I think we need to congratulate our staff for their accomplishment here, for their award for this. So I think, as always being shown, our staff are exemplary. And that includes everybody, right? Good. So, have a resolution that correspondence item 13-1B received for information. That is moved by Councillor Fenning, Councillor Gordick. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Next item are bylaws. Recommendation that bylaw numbers 2021-20 and 2021-21 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed in open council. That is moved by Councillor Gerber, Councillor Hallman, all in favor. That is carried. Thank you. Are there any notice of motions? Seeing none. Are there any announcements? Councillor Gordick.
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, I just wanted to acknowledge Volunteer Week, which starts next week. So just wanted to give a shout out to all our amazing volunteers in Wilmot. If I can do a personal one for our fantastic Terry Foxers that we have here in our township. Just as a little sense of pride is we're going into our 25th year here in Wilmot, compared to the 41 for the Fox Foundation in general for the Terry Fox Run itself. Yeah, so we're just very proud of that, and the other obviously amazing groups that we have here in Township. So just thank you for all your hard work, and happy Volunteer Week next week.
Thank you. We certainly appreciate that. And we also want to recognize your and Nigel's efforts with the Terry Fox Run. Councillor Hallman.
Thank you, through the mayor. I was also going to mention Volunteer Week, and I look forward to the launching of the neighbor program that we approved in the work program. So looking forward to seeing that unfold. Also, Earth Day is on April 22nd, and this year's theme is educational resources and climate. So look forward to seeing that. And our family always celebrates Earth Day with picking up garbage in the community. So looking forward to doing that as we always do with our kiddos. Also, I wanted to thank everyone who has been vaccinated when it was their time to do so. And I do know a secret that Councillor Gordick has a birthday on Wednesday, and she is spending her birthday getting her vaccine. So that's exciting. But check out the Region of Waterloo's website for your eligibility. And there are many pharmacies within the community that if you're over 55 can take you. So the quicker we get vaccinated when it's your time to do so, the quicker we can see these COVID numbers trickle back down. And the last thing I wanted to mention was the province made the announcement for the safety of our families and our teachers in the community that kids will be learning from home next week. And I know that was an emotional announcement in our house. And so my heart goes out to the teachers who will be switching gears back to teaching from home, and families who are making that juggle to manage all those aspects. Please reach out for counseling if you need it. Mental health matters, kindness matters, and let's support each other through this next phase of challenging times together.
Thank you, Councillor Hallman. Yes, I got my shot on Friday, so so far it's working. And I haven't had any side effects, so we put some of those rumors to bed. Anyway, Councillor Fanning.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Armstrong. I will second that lack of side effects because my mother-in-law is in long-term care. My husband and I were lucky enough to be able to be vaccinated. So we've had our first shots all the way back on February 26th and feeling all right. So waiting for our second shot. And yeah, you know, it's really, I know that some people have had some aches and pains with it, but everybody that I know that has gotten it, both here in our community and further abroad, because I have friends and relatives in other parts of the world, and they all have, that everyone that has had it is doing really well. So encourage everyone to get out there and get your shot. Sustainability Committee. We are working on some things for Earth Day, Earth Week. So we'll be watching for that. And I'm gonna embarrass Leslie, but she has been wonderfully, she's been great at leading the conversation on that and leading the work that we're getting done. And I don't see that Mr. Romney is on here right now, but I want to thank him for being the chair of that committee, and the two of them and other staff that are helping us as a community, our township as an organization, to be leaders in sustainability and make a difference for our environment. So watch for social media posts from the township, and there are things that we can do to participate. There are a lot of tips coming your way, so hopefully you'll follow along and participate in activities and daily challenges that are issued. Unfortunately, with the pandemic restrictions, we're not able to do what we would like to do, which would be, you know, stage a cleanup or other group project to do something great in the community. But we'll all hold on to that and do what we can individually, clean up wherever we go. You know, leave the world a little cleaner than we found it. And we can all participate every day and make Earth Day every day for our lives.
Thank you, Councillor Fenning. Councillor Fisher.
Through the mayor, I just want to make a shout out to the Herb Group of Companies. They got another award this year, Truckload Carriers Association Best Fleet to Drive for 2021. And if you ever go to their website, they list the awards they've got every year. In 2020, they had 3 awards, 2019, 3 awards, 2018, 5 awards, and it just keeps going on and on and on. So I think we're pretty blessed to have a company like that in Wilmot Township, and congratulate them for a great company to work for.
Hear, hear. So no further announcements? So now we will step into delegations, and before commencing with hearing from delegations, I would like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. Delegations will be allotted 10 minutes to speak and will be provided a 2-minute warning reminder when your 10 minutes is nearing completion. We also ask that you leave the meeting once your issue has been addressed. You are then welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting being webcast live via YouTube. If you conduct yourself in any of the following manners, it will result in an immediate muting and removal from the meeting. Interrupting councillors, staff, or other delegations, derogatory statements about councillors, staff, or others, hate speech, or defamatory comments. I will now call upon the delegations. First up is Mr. Rory Farnan. Is Mr. Farnan coming in?
Through you, Mayor Armstrong, we are just having a little bit of technical difficulty. Very sorry. If everyone could just be patient for a moment as we sort out this issue.
I'm here.
Very well. Welcome,
Thank
Rory.
you very much.
You have your 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Armstrong, and I believe I have an accompanied deck. Yes, terrific.
Sorry, I'm having some difficulty sharing the screen. I'm going to leave the meeting and then come back.
Okay, don't be long.
I'll try not to be. To the deputy clerk, I'm going to make you host while I leave.
Sounds good.
Okay, we'll try this again.
Welcome back.
Hey, it's working. Of course,
Terrific.
Zoom asked me for picking out traffic lights that time. Carry on, Mr. Foreman.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the technical backup. My name is Rory Farnan, and I am a resident of Manheim Road in Wilmot Township. Also the Secretary for Citizens for Safe Groundwater. Next slide, please. Tonight, CSGW continues its series of council delegations relating to the proposed Hallman Pit. Our focus tonight is the importance of agriculture provincially, regionally, and at home here in Wilmot Township. We will also comment on the agricultural impact study relating to the proposed Hallman Pit application. Next slide, please. Our economic prosperity is deep-rooted in agriculture. In fact, we promote our agricultural sector as a primary marketing asset when attracting people and employment to the township. As we continue to grow as a region, so too does our reliance on local agriculture and safe drinking water. Our success to growth, putting food and water first. Next slide, please. Data from Statistics Canada Census of Agriculture highlights some interesting data trends as it relates to our agricultural sector in Waterloo Region. That being said, I'm proud to see Wilmot Township as a leader, which makes the commitment to protecting our farmland even greater than before. Next slide, please. Prime farmland is the foundation of our local food economy, agri-food exports, economic prosperity, and the growing bio-based economy. So it was shocking to learn that less than 5% of Ontario's land base is classified prime farmland. The proposed property of the Hallman Pit is classified as prime farmland, which is concerning to the preservation of this rare economic resource. Next slide, please. The National Farmers Union is committed to the success of creating healthy, vibrant rural communities, promoting environmentally safe farming practices for a better future. This includes restricting mineral aggregate resource extraction of prime farmland due to concern relating to rehabilitation to its original condition. Next slide, please. CSGW is humbled by the support of the NFU. This includes a written statement calling for the proposed zone change application of Jackson Harvest Farms to be denied due to the property's prime farmland designation and its significant role in recharging the aquifers underneath it. We want to take a moment to publicly thank the NFU Waterloo Wellington for their support. Next slide, please. The Ontario Federation of Agriculture represents family farm businesses across Ontario, with members located right here in Wilmot Township. These farm businesses help form the backbone of our robust food system and rural communities. The OFA also has rehabilitation concerns as it relates to aggregate extraction, recommending that these activities be prohibited on prime agricultural land. If you were listening to the Mike Farwell show this morning on 570 News, you would have heard Mike speaking with Peggy Breakveld, president of the OFA, and their call for being strategic when it comes to the protection of our prime farmland. Next slide, please. Citizens for Safe Groundwater also recognizes the importance of sustainable agriculture and the protection of our prime farmland, especially here in Wilmot Township. Given the absolute pitiful rehabilitation statistics in Waterloo Region, Council has to consider this very serious question. Will the proposed Hallman pit fall victim to this statistic if approved? Next slide, please. As part of the region's review of the proposed Hallman pit application, an independent third-party peer review of the applicant's agricultural impact study was commissioned. Mr. Hoffman is a professional agrologist, my apologies, and has been working in agriculture since 1971. Mr. Hoffman's experience has been commissioned at both the municipal and provincial levels of government. Next slide, please. Mr. Hoffman's review leaves questions unanswered. In the provincial policy statement, section 2.5.4.1, rehabilitation of an aggregate pit located on prime agriculture has as a requirement site rehabilitation back to an acceptable agricultural condition. Given the statements of Mr. Hoffman's report, CSGW is concerned that this required rehabilitation standard may not be proven in the application stage, let alone achieved if awarded. Next slide, please. Cumulative impacts is required to consider the past, present, and future effects to the surrounding area of a proposed aggregate extraction site. There are a number of different operators who can extract at their own desired timing, and the cumulative impacts of all these different operations must be considered. Next slide, please. To provide a perspective to the cumulative impact of all licensed gravel pits in the area, let's look at a comparable visual using our largest community in Wilmot. Next slide, please. For those of you whose frame of reference is not a country block, please take a look at the map of beautiful New Hamburg. In a moment, I will overlay the proposed Hallman pit, as well as the current licensed pits to the south of the property. Next slide, please. This startling visual illustrates the negative cumulative impact of aggregate operations to Wilmot's sustainable food sector. Wilmot prides itself in being proudly rooted in agriculture. These impacts are not only centered around losing prime farmland, but also to the prosperity of our farmers, their families, their employees, and the overall economic impact that is deeply rooted in this township. Next slide, please.
2-minute warning.
Thank you. In conclusion, the Region of Waterloo peer review of the Hallman Pit AIS is conflicting with the applicants Acceptance not provided. Prime farmland is a vital asset to Wilmot's continued economic prosperity. Strong support exists for protection of prime farmland against aggregate extraction. In conclusion, the Holman Pit application serves as an example that Wilmot Council needs to protect its prime farmland against aggregate extraction. Let's put food and water first, always. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. Next up is Mr. Robert Giebois. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you. Can we share the screen with the counselors?
You can.
Okay. It says only the host can share in this meeting?
Pardon me. The host will, if you've provided them with your presentation, they will put it up on the screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a YouTube
just bear with us a
presentation.
moment.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, the host does not have any presentation for this party.
We have a YouTube link that we sent to Tracy.
Sorry, again, can you please, we'll just give us a moment to sort this out.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, give me a moment. I'll have to access my emails.
Okay.
Please bear with me. I'm about to share it. Let's hope it works.
Thank you. Sorry.
Here today to talk to you about agriculture and rehabilitation. My name is Robert Giebois, and I am a retired university professor as well as farmer. As part of its mandate, the provincial policy statement states the following: prime agriculture areas shall be protected for long-term use for agriculture. Specialty crop areas shall be given the highest priority for protection, followed by classes 1, 2, and 3 soils, in this order of priority. In the proposed gravel pit area, 84% of the rated land is either class 1, class 2, or class 3. In other words, a very high proportion of the land is of the highest protected priority. The agricultural report states neither the subject lands nor the study area is located within a designated specialty crop area. They also state there is limited investment in agricultural buildings and structures within the study area. Let's take a look at these two statements. The first one has to do with specialty crops. Well, the owner or farmer of the land decides what crop to plant. If the owner wants to plant corn, it's not a specialty crop. But if the owner decides to plant potatoes, it is a specialty crop and it is of the highest protected priority. So that's up to the owner. However, the soils, as we have just seen, are excellent and they are of the highest protected priority, class 1, 2, or 3. Now let's take a look at this statement here. There is limited investment in agricultural buildings in the study area. You will see here a map. What the report does is takes a 1 kilometer radius around the gravel pit, which is this orange piece in the picture. You will also notice a purple circle and a red circle. The purple circle represents a state-of-the-art egg-laying facility with several buildings worth millions of dollars, which is directly across the road from the proposed pit. This was not included within the report. The red circle is at 1.2 kilometers, just a tiny bit over the 1 kilometer radius. This is another state-of-the-art poultry operation with several buildings and millions of dollars of investment. And thirdly, not shown on the diagram beside the purple circle, is a cattle feedlot, which has usually between 300 and 400 head of cattle. Let me reiterate. You've got major investments worth millions of dollars in agricultural buildings that are not included within this report. In other words, the report does not recognize the reality. I would say this is selective evidence in the applicant's agricultural report. We've got protected agricultural land, 80% of the rated land. The soil is excellent. It has high priority for protection in the provincial policy statement. The report uses a 1 kilometer radius of the pit to evaluate agriculture. Why? The report states, and I quote, time and cost. This is not scientific. It will give poor or false inferences, as we've seen, and basically it's dependent upon how much money the applicant wishes to spend, not on the truth or the accuracy of the statement. Let's take a look at the Ontario Federation of Agriculture's response to proposed amendments to the Aggregate Resource Act. Dust and noise generated from truck traffic can negatively impact crops and livestock. Dusts are abrasive and harmful not only to livestock feeding of these crops, but also to harvesting equipment. Noises disturb livestock and poultry, potentially compromising herd flock health, resulting in reduced production and farm income. Investments were made in protected farmland. These poultry operations, cattle operations were made investments because it was agriculture. Now, what happens if this proposed gravel pit comes into effect and we have these known negative effects of aggregate operations on farming? Who's going to make up that lost income for these farmers or these investors? Will there be other unforeseen negative effects of operations because the pit is proposing to operate 12 to 13 hours a day? What happens if their water is contaminated? How do you feed these hundreds of thousands of chickens or turkeys or whatever it is that these operations include? Questions to ask right now, not before the pit goes in. There are some associated problems with rehabilitation. It's not a panacea. Firstly, the soil structure is irrevocably changed so that the result in soil compaction, which turns the result to drainage problems. Secondly, steep slopes are not suitable for agriculture. They take up a large proportion of these pit sites. Farmers do not like steep slopes. Thirdly, since the site is usually lower in topography than the surrounding land, water can flow into and pool in this lower topography. This water can cause excessive moisture and bring waterborne contaminants into the sites. Problems. In this study, we look at 30 sites, stratified and random sampling, representing 30% of the population of all active and surrendered sites in the region of Waterloo. In other words, a telescope is being focused right on our region. What did this report find? Of the amount of land that is originally disturbed from aggregate operations at the start of each new year of production, only about, and listen carefully, colleagues, counselors, 2.3% of this disturbed land will be rehabilitated to its previous land condition or another suitable land use. 2.3%. This is a dismal statistic. Results from the study indicate that progressive rehabilitation efforts are falling short and a net gain in disturbed land is occurring each year. In other words, rehabilitation is falling behind the disturbed land. Things are getting worse. The rate of rehabilitation in Ontario shows no statistically significant improvement between the two time periods between 1992-2001 and 2002-2011, despite stricter legislation implemented in the 90s, in addition to growing social and environmental responsibility among aggregate producers. The amount of rehabilitation occurring has not significantly improved over the past 19 years.
2 minutes left.
So, the overall rate for Ontario, 2.3%, which is in the next slide in orange in the next table. And the overall rate for our region is 2.7, and it's green in the table. Both of these statistics do not bode well for rehabilitation. And here are the tables. In this report, the author interviews also people who live around gravel pits. In other words, people that have experienced what it's like to be around the gravel pit and what the problems are. Regular inspections have to be performed. Performance reviews should be made. Enforcement should be done. Timelines should be stated and kept to. What people found, and these are quotes right from the actual research, is that in theory, and I quote from an individual, in theory out there, but in reality, it's going to cost the operator money to rehabilitate. They won't do it because it eats into their profits. Another quote, it all depends on the regulations that are in place, the level of enforcement for the MNR. And by enforcement, somebody going out on site and saying, what's being done here? Are you achieving any progressive rehabilitation? Are you doing it properly? Timelines, enforcement, and performance. That's what we need. And at the moment, it doesn't seem to be done. In addition, you've got several gravel pits in the area, a cluster, and this is more challenging to manage these individual contributions when they're all packed together rather than a single extraction site. And once again, councillors, I bring to your attention, all plans, municipal, regional, and provincial, include health, safety, well-being of the community as primary goals. If you keep these things in mind, I'm sure that it will guide you to the right conclusion. Say to yourself, how does this gravel pit improve our health? How does this gravel pit contribute to our safety? How does this gravel pit contribute to the well-being of the community and not to some big construction company who's making a profit in Toronto, but our community?
That is the 10 minutes.
Okay, your time was up, Robert.
Thank you very much, Mayor, councillors.
Thank you for attending. Our next presenter is Linda Lapel. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you. I also have a slideshow sent in. Maybe it can be uploaded while I start talking. Yes, thank you. Mayor Armstrong, Council, thank you for listening to us here again, as you will be asked soon to weigh food and water for all of us against sand and gravel. Next picture. My name is Linda Lapple, known by thousands in the region as the host of Shingletown's annual Potato Fest over a 12 years period till 2015. My family farms within the 1 kilometer study area on exactly the same soil type and conditions as the proposed Halman pit, growing potatoes successfully. Next picture. Why do I care today? I care because it must be realized this is not an ordinary piece of farm real estate that can be assessed using common templates. For the safety of the community, its history needs to be fully investigated and then the entire property assessed and treated accordingly, not just the residential portion as stated in the site condition report filed with the ministry. I care because Jackson Harvest Farm and my farm, we operate both in the same source water protected area. Should anything go wrong in the gravel pit when it comes to groundwater contamination, it is very likely that things will first be blamed on me, since my family farms next to the regional wells. I care because the soil in this area allows us to grow almost any crop. It's like gardening on a raised bed. I know after extraction and rehabilitation, if any, of the gravel pit, it will be likely trying to grow something in a leaking bathtub. While missing or ignoring relevant information, the Halman pit AIA concluded minimal impact on the surrounding agricultural activities within the study area. Next picture. And this is where the problem starts. The radius of the study area is limited to 1 kilometer from the proposed site, which leads to false representations of the area and technical errors in the following: land use, irrigation, land fragmentation, traffic, specialty crops, and investment. I like to start with the impact on traffic. Traffic impact doesn't stop after 1 kilometer. We farmers need to use regional roads too, and so do the added trucks from the pit. About 15 years ago, we felt trucking traffic impact firsthand. My husband was driving on Queen Street between Whitmore and Bleams Road coming home with 2 loaded hay wagons when an overtired transport truck driver rear-ended him. The impact ripped off the tongue of the wagon and sent it flying across the road into the ditch. The other tongue on the wagon of the tractor had its tongue bent to a U shape. It was sheer luck the impact was not fatal. Needless to say, ever since we avoid driving evenings and plan trips with equipment very carefully. The impact of additional traffic will be felt far beyond the 1 kilometer radius and should be considered in the study. On Whitmore Road, I cannot imagine driving a tractor with duals or equipment 12 feet wide, getting past oncoming trucks without causing damage to property. Under section 4.2 land use, it reads, but for the study area, only winter wheat was observed, showing the entire front of our farm as one field of winter wheat, when in fact there were 5 different fields, including a specialty crop. This is a false statement. My farm is on the left top corner of this map. Next picture. This is the year 2018 when the study was done, and the picture shows clearly multiple crops grown along Bleams Road and including 10 acres of green peas. The dotted fields are our farm. If there was an actual windshield survey done, then they would have also noted the sign for potatoes on Bleams Road, which we grow since over 20 years for farm gate sale and wholesale distribution. Was this specialty crop overlooked on purpose? Land use study. Neither subject land nor study area is zoned an agricultural special area. This leads to the impression that there are no specialty crops grown in the area, or even the assumption the land is not suited or producing anything but wheat, soy, and corn. If the consultants had treated each property within the 1 kilometer radius as a unit and not just looked at the land fraction within the radius, they would have found very specialty crops. Next picture. Plus, they would have seen a first-hand demonstration of living culture in the word agriculture. They would have seen 2 fields of Asian vegetables grown by Hmong people for their community in town. Vegetables foreign to me, but grown on the same type of soil as found in the proposed gravel pit. Next 3 slides. Land fragmentation, agricultural property, next slide, in the range of 10, next slide, to 128 acres were noted in the surrounding area. This is false. Next picture. Again, the strict 1 kilometer radius only considered the full size of a parcel when completely inside the study area. It doesn't record the actual size of a parcel that are partial in the study area. Our farm is example 187 acres in size, and my neighbors to the east also in that range. But both our properties are recorded as less than 65 acres. The study also gives the impression that small parcels are not worth investigating, and therefore failed to notice that the 16-acre parcel on Whitmer Road, mentioned as facility number 4 to 9, is in fact a research site, custom feeding 300 plus head of cattle, the owner having won twice a Premier's Award for Agri-Food Innovation Excellence for developing in a high-temperature composting system that turns manure into garden fertilizer. Investments, irrigation, no investments in irrigation in the subject land or study area. First of all, these observations were made late August and October, when irrigation equipment generally is already packed away and in storage. In 4.34, it is stated that historically a bermed area existed to hold water for mixing and distributing manure, but no irrigation equipment was observed, when in fact the hydrological study had an irrigation well recorded on the land that has not been decommissioned to date. Rehabilitation, next picture. The idea of shaving off soil layers by layer and storing it separately and replying it quickly elsewhere sounds good on paper, but in reality, soil horizons cannot be peeled in layers like an onion, especially in this area where you find areas with very little topsoil and often a topsoil-subsoil mix as deep as the farmer's equipment worked the land, followed by almost pure sand, as shown in the pictures. The promise to put 50 centimeter topsoil back when there is only 15 to 30 at its best to begin with is not realistic. Soil is what sustains us, and it is the only thing on earth capable of producing. Everything else on this planet is processing, value-adding, shipping business. But truly producing are the microbes in the soil. In one handful, you find more microbes than people on the planet. But in the aggregate industry, this very base of life on our planet, Mother Earth, is just called overburden. When you compare Canada's landmass with a dinner plate set for 28 people, only 2 plates would represent farmable areas, and only 1 of them would represent crop growing areas, the other poorer pasture land. But only a small rim of the crop growing plate would represent the area of soil classes as good as we find in Wilmot. With every rezoning from agriculture to another use, we are consciously chipping away on the best part of the dinner plate. Don't sacrifice another chip and assume there will still always be someone out there to feed you. Mankind has in its history done without a lot of things, and times are changing fast, but we have never done without food and water. Please look at facts, not just paper. Last slide. We hope and pray, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Our next speaker is Ann Ehrlich. Welcome, Ann.
Yeah, thank you. I'm waiting also to have my screen shared. I sent it in.
There you
So
go.
my name is Ann Ehrlich, and I'm supporting the Citizens for Safe Groundwater. Given my experience in terms of sustainable development, both in Canada and internationally, I worked overseas for many years. I'm also really grateful to be with you tonight because this is my growing up roots. I'm originally from Waterloo, and everybody joked and said how hard I found it when we decided after we lived in Africa to move to Brant County, and that was, they said, the biggest challenge for my movement around the world. Since we returned to Canada many years ago, I became a public health researcher at McMaster University, and I'm now retired. And we live on an organic farm just north of Paris and have been involved with a lot of concerns around sustainable food lands in our communities, and wanted to share that with you, and have, as an NFU member and Gravel Watch member, started looking at what evidence we have, and many of the speakers so far have spoken very well about it. So I'm really not going to go over all the slides, but quickly share a project that we did in terms of mapping prime farmland and aggregate extraction in Ontario, and look in specifically at Wilmot Township. Next slide. Actually, just to quickly highlight, the picture that you saw earlier in that introductory slide was one that Linda Leplig sent me some time back. And next slide. Her comments, I think, speak to what we're all sharing, what it feels like to look at the landscape as it changes. And she wrote to me and she said, when she sent the picture, I felt as if we were flying over a Garden of Eden when she took that aerial shot, with all the fruitful land and carefully tended farms below us, when suddenly a deep wound in the landscape appeared, a gravel pit. And it was very similar to a paragraph in Carl Hebert's aerial view of the Grand River, his book that many of you probably know, which is absolutely beautiful. And he shares the same sentiment when he flew over a farm, an area very close to where you are, showing the same kind of very tragic, if you will, difference between that very arable and lush farmland and suddenly the gravel pits. Next slide. So here we are looking at the question of sustainability, and having looked at global to local sustainability in courses I've taught, We're looking at southwestern Ontario, and as you know, the Greater Golden Horseshoe in particular have some of the most productive agricultural land in Canada. We just heard it from the earlier speakers. Your Wilmot Township municipal area, from the work we did when we looked at the top 10 producing municipalities in this area, has the 65,000 acres, of which the majority is class 1 to 3 prime agricultural land. So again, 93% is prime agricultural land. And how do we balance those local agriculture with the needs that are local as well as beyond, in terms of what currently is the policy to have aggregate resources close to market? Next slide. The questions around sustainable agriculture as well as sustainable aggregate management come to light. And I think one of the most recent references that I've found that really speak very well to how we are at a crucial point in terms of these decision-making processes. And you see that second quote, which is by the University of Geneva and worked with the United Nations Environment Program. And the last part speaks very well to the point we're at right now. Is at the same time, there are materials, these are finite materials which cannot be produced from our terrestrial, riverine, and marine environments in quantities needed to meet demand from a world of 10 billion people without effective policy planning, regulation, and management. Such actions remain largely unaddressed by decision makers in public or private sectors. It's time we challenge this paradigm of infinite resources. Next slide. So way back, actually in 1987, which for many of us doesn't seem that long ago, but they really started talking about sustainable development goals. And the UN definition was meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And this is very consistent with a lot of the definitions of sustainability that we see with our Indigenous peoples in Canada. Next slide. So this again is putting our current planning processes within that global framework. And many of you know the Sustainable Development Goals encompass all the determinants to mostly health and sustainability and prosperity. Carry on. Next slide. Canada was one of the signatories to the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, as they were for the Millennium Development Goals earlier. And these 7 goals focus on 5 pillars: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. And thankfully, in the project that we were doing on mapping the prime farmland and aggregate resources, we were in partnership with the university and with NFU and many communities to make sure that some of this data goes out so that you can use it in your planning processes. So it begs the question, are local village targets for food security and sustainability aligned with provincial, national, and global commitments to the SDGs? So there are targets that that Canada has committed to. How does that fit with our local planning targets? And again, that speaks to food system sustainability. Do you have accountability structures and processes and data to ensure local intersectoral planning and evidence-based decision-making? And these are questions we're raising, and I think many of us are still trying to work with that. Next question, next slide, sorry. So we're reminded that in some of the data we found from some of the ministries that are not yet openly putting these out, but these are from official data sources. The total sand and gravel resources in Ontario are 5.1 million acres. Of that, the total acreages of prime farmland in Ontario is 2.26 million acres. So there is quite a difference there that again needs to be considered in our planning. Next slide. So as we did our mapping project, I just want to share with you the preliminary maps. This is still a work in progress. Next slide. Next slide. So this is the density of authorized active, sorry, go back one, please. This is the density of authorized active and inactive aggregate sites in Ontario, just most recently in August of 2020. And you'll see the density of the activity in the southwestern Ontario in particular. Very high densely active sites for aggregate extraction. Next slide.
2 minutes.
And then here are the slides with prime farmland on the left. And again, comparing that to where the aggregate activity sites are. Next. And here you see the overlay between the percentage of active and inactive aggregate sites on prime farmland in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And you'll see Wilmot Township being in that high density area of over 80% to 100% of aggregate activity is on prime farmland. And I think we've heard others speak to that as well. Go ahead, next slide. So in summary, we found that just over 77% of aggregate activities are located on prime farmland, and it's very comparable to other data we received but couldn't publish yet from ministries who found over 80% of aggregate activities are on prime farmland. And again, it speaks to the evidence of where are we allowing these activities to take place when we're trying to protect farmland to sustain food security. And there is growing evidence of fragility of local and global food systems at this time, as we know. Next slide. I'm just going to summarize this, that there are added risks to health as we're looking at the kind of licensing agreements that we want to assure will protect health. And what are the precautionary measures that are needed when you're looking at other contaminant risks, for example, with sludge and agrochemicals that are used on lands, particularly in wellhead protection areas. And by whom and how are contaminants of concern tested and monitored for local decision-making? What monitoring data is required? And all of this speaks to having a much stronger locally based intersectoral committee or a structure and process that supports that localized evidence-based decision-making. Next slide.
That's time.
So this is the final slide. I'm just going to mention that during the COVID pandemic, we were really reminded that there are many risks to sustainability, and the systemic weaknesses exposed by the virus will be compounded by climate change in the years to come. And the COVID-19 is a wake-up call for food systems that need to be heeded. And that was the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Our next delegation is Elisa McClurk. Welcome, Elisa.
Hi. I sent a slide, a deck. Will it be coming up?
Should be. Just takes a moment to come up.
So appreciate very much you taking the time tonight to include me with your delegates. I'm presenting on behalf of my environmental consulting company, EcoVoca, that seeks to empower citizens to be effective, engaged community planners. Next slide. I have an undergrad in environmental studies where I studied aggregate resources at University of Waterloo, including rehabilitation. I also have my master's in planning from the University of Waterloo. Tonight I speak on behalf of the Citizens for Safe Groundwater, the Food Systems Roundtable of Waterloo Region, of which I am a member as well, KW Urban Harvester, which I help coordinate, transforming urban spaces into anything sustainable in KW, and Transition KW, which promotes community resiliency in KW, including local food resiliency. And in 2012, I spoke on behalf of Transition KW to a provincial tribunal regarding the provincial framework of legislation regulating the aggregate industry. Before I speak regarding agricultural impacts of this project, I wish to speak briefly about the demand for aggregate. Next slide. As outlined in the State of the Aggregate Resources of Ontario report in 2010, demand per capita demand for aggregate resources in Ontario is quite high, superseded here only by Alberta. Now Manitoba and Quebec are lower, even though at the time they had a higher population growth. And Manitoba had the same GDP and still lower per capita aggregate consumption. Next slide. And here we're shown to have higher per capita consumption than even the US, Australia, New Zealand, and much of Europe. Now I realize that the provincial policy statement does not require a consideration of the need for aggregate. However, I ask that this is something Council consider, given the serious impacts of this project on so many factors. Next slide. All of which the Minister is required to have regard to under the ARA, the Aggregate Resources Act, including the environment, the community of Shingletown, water, truck traffic, next slide, and agriculture. Next slide. Now, as you've heard tonight and many times, these lands are prime agricultural lands. And as you've also heard, agricultural land does not have a success rate in terms of rehabilitation. Numbers around 20%, and even tonight as low as 2%. And I was speaking to someone today who said basically negligible rehabilitation rate occurs. Next slide. I'm going to speak now about something near and dear to my heart. Well, we've been talking about with Anne global food production. I want to talk about the needs of Waterloo region for food. Through my work with food systems in this area, I have learned that many households are food insecure, and this was the case even before the pandemic. With the pandemic, there's been a 40% increase in food distribution from the Waterloo Food Bank. And this food insecurity is even greater for marginalized groups. Next slide. In response to the pandemic, my community garden group, KW Urban Harvester, launched our Grow a Row program, which encourages people to grow an extra row for those in need. With very little notice, we managed to distribute soil, seedlings, seeds to hundreds of gardeners and create numerous garden plots and yard chairs. We are working this year to make the program even more successful with the hopes of quadrupling the number of gardeners we reach and donating 10,000 pounds of produce to those in need in the community. I feel the need to also add that land in urban areas like Kitchener-Waterloo is extremely valuable. With a high student population and large numbers of newcomers to the area, the demands for urban community garden plots is extremely high, and we have lists of dozens of people looking for gardening space. If only we could have access to land as precious as this prime agricultural land that is being proposed for development. We are trying and doing everything we can to help these people. And yet, while we could be waiting for these subject lands to be rehabilitated back to agricultural purposes, people could and will very likely go hungry. And this situation may only get worse if we set a dangerous precedent about how disposable our agricultural land is. Next slide. So my recommendations are simple. Protect this agricultural land. Turn down this zoning request. In the longer term, push for an assessment, a requirement under the legislative framework for an assessment of aggregate needs, and make that research transparent. And discourage, as Stephanie Gertz pointed out in her last delegation to you, discourage the use of prime aggregate so that we don't have a demand for this material. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alyssa. Our next speaker is Jennifer Lozon.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Good
Welcome.
evening, Mayor Armstrong and Council. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. I would like to pass on my sincere apologies for not being able to respond to you at the last two meetings. The first time I tried to engage, I thought it was due to the weather. And then the second time I actually got some help. And they found out that I had no microphone on my computer. So I was quite embarrassed. I felt like I wanted to throw myself under a bus. But here I am. I'm finally in. And although much of what I am about to say tonight may not be exactly on topic, it's been about 6 weeks of trying to navigate through all this and get to speak with you. So I really appreciate you letting me say my bit. So anyway, I've been a resident of Shingletown for 23 years, and the constant unknown of what our future holds for us here in this little hamlet of ours is actually hitting me extremely hard. I find myself waking up in the middle of the night and worrying about what will happen to our community if this gravel pit is approved. The cumulative effects of what will happen when a gravel pit is placed next to a long-established residential community can only be really a disaster in the making. And I must say, this has been a very challenging process to get my voice heard, between trying to navigate all the ins and outs of the computer and going from being an official objector to not because of a computer glitch somewhere, navigating Zoom meetings and being completely out of my comfort zone with all this talking and trying to do all this through a pandemic. It's been quite daunting, to say the least. And I can assure you that there are many people out there in our community that also would like their objections heard, but they are just completely out of their league on a lot of levels. And it's just been an extremely difficult process to be able to say my piece. So, but I do want to say that when I drive down into Shingletown, after a hard day's work, and I look off to my left where I see the rolling green hills and the wetlands that shimmers like an aquamarine jewel, I am so moved and so grateful to have this piece of heaven just steps from my home. And it rips my heart out when I think that someday maybe this gorgeous tract of land will be torn apart and hundreds of noisy and filthy trucks will just be crawling all over it. And I think, when will people get the message to stop wrecking the planet for financial gain? And humans are, making the earth a broken and increasingly unlivable planet through climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And I just feel that, for so long we've been waging a senseless and suicidal war on nature. I actually came across this article that was published in the Record on February 19th, and it stated that basically this is kind of a make it or break it year indeed, because the risks of things becoming irreversible is gaining ground, and we are at the point of no return. The report stated that about 9 million people die each year from pollution. 1 million of the Earth's plants and animals are close to extinction, and up to 400 million tons of toxic sludge, heavy metals, and other industrial waste are dumped into our water. And it's, it says that 15% of the world's wetlands only remain, like 15%, it's crazy. And I think, is this what we want for our region? Like, to allow this to happen in our community is just morally wrong on so many levels. And, who's going to be responsible when things start to go wrong? Would it not make more sense financially and otherwise to protect what we already have? And, I must say, Mayor Armstrong, I read and I really, really enjoyed the article that you wrote for the Rural Post in the March 18th edition. You spoke about how you feel so privileged to be able to look out of your office window and watch children playing and people walking their dogs, and how it refreshes your spirit to be able to have this view every. You said that you are warmed and encouraged by the beauty that you get to witness. But I ask you, what if a higher power came along and said, sorry, Mayor Armstrong, but we need to put in a gravel pit right outside your window. I know it's really going to suck having to look out your window and see piles of dirt and dust and trucks, but this is what's going to happen. Now, imagine if this was your living room window and not just your office. This is what all of us on Whitmer Road in Shingletown could be facing if this gravel pit is approved. We love our views too. We are refreshed every day by the beauty we see, and this is why we are fighting so hard to protect it. What you look upon from your office window is not just the community in motion, but it's human survival. And you can bet that if someone really did want to put a gravel pit outside your office window, we would fight for you too. I do not understand how Wilmot Township can declare a climate emergency and have an absolute greenhouse gas emissions target reduction, and not only want to meet that target, but exceed it, and then possibly allow a large-scale gravel pit operation in a residential community. Do you have a picture for me? I sent one in with Tracy. Could I have that up, please? Yes. So the other morning I was driving to work. I was going down Queen Street and I followed this dump truck all the way down Queen Street and through Petersburg. And the whole way it was just belching out all these black clouds of smoke. And when I got to the light, that's when I got to take a picture. And as you can see, he actually gunned it right in front of me and went through a red light. So you can see that the light is red there. And all the way through Petersburg, all this, smoke was coming out. And I think, oh my gosh, like this is what we're going to be in for on our roads, is like 5,000 of these trucks every week. And it's, quite scary to think of that. So is this what we really want for the air in our community? Whitmer Road, Shingletown, Petersburg, and beyond. And is this going to help Wilmot reach its greenhouse gas emissions target? One thing that really hit me hard was at the November 2000 meeting at the Wilmot Rec Center, after the applicant shared how many trucks we could expect to be entering and exiting the pit per hour. He was asked if he cared at all about the people in the communities that the gravel pit would impact. He replied, "Of course I care, but I can't help where the good Lord puts the aggregate." Then he and all his experts laughed. In a room full of very concerned and stressed out Wilmot citizens, he laughed. It was so rude and callous and demeaning that it showed without a shadow of a doubt that he really does not care. Gravel pits are destroying communities and the vibrancy of the land. The life is just sucked away. Time to stop this is now, because how much of a burden will our children and our grandchildren have to bear as a result of our choices? Based on the values you say you uphold, lead us forward into a green, safe, and healthy community where every breath of air we inhale or every mouthful of water we drink isn't toxic. Give all of us, the animals and the landscape included, the right to thrive. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our next speaker is Stephanie Gertz. Councillor Hom.
Thank you. Oh. I should probably put the other earpiece in, shouldn't I?
Hello, thank you so much for having me tonight.
One moment, Steph.
Hello, I have a presentation, please. Can you?
Yeah, just one moment though. Councillor Holman wants to make a comment.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Stephanie. I'm not sure if the other delegation is still available, but my question was for that delegation. The delegation made a comment that just wanted to comment on, she had mentioned she had an issue with, and if I just made a note here, of an official objector, and she also had issues with connecting. So I just wanted to see if there's anything that staff could do to support her in making sure that she was able to have access to council meetings and to connecting with staff.
Who wants to answer that? Ms. Murray.
It appears as though that delegation has left, but I can reassure council that I worked very closely with her to try and come to solutions to make sure that she was able to. It was just technical issues, and we offered to do some testing prior to council meetings to make sure that she could participate, and she was going to give this evening one last try with her child was helping her out, and if it didn't work, then we were going to try to do more for her. So yes, we did try.
Thank you so much. That's really important, and I'm really thankful to hear that you were able to support to make sure that it was successful during these trying times.
Thank you. Okay, Stephanie, go ahead. Welcome.
Sorry, Mayor, I just saw that the Director of Development Services, I think, had the answer to my second question.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Armstrong. I was going to, the issue with the official objector is not related to the Township of Wilmot's process. It's related to the M&R process. She needs to, realistically, we can connect her with M&R staff, but that's a separate process outside of our control and regulation. But if she calls into the office, we can definitely try to help her connect with that staff. But that process, again, not subject to council's involvement.
Thanks for that clarification.
Okay. All right, Stephanie, go ahead. Welcome.
Thank you so much. So tonight, so my name is Stephanie Gertz. I am an active volunteer within Wilmot Township, also with Citizens for Safe Groundwater, I volunteer with them. But tonight I am wearing the hat of the co-chair of the Food Systems Roundtable of Waterloo Region. The Food Systems Roundtable has been active for over 15 years and started out initially working in partnership with the region of Waterloo. The Food Systems Roundtable provides education on food systems to improve the sustainability of Waterloo region's local food environment and the health of its residents. Through partnership with producers, vendors, and educators, the Roundtable enables research and education on food policy, agricultural and health sciences, and sustainability to raise awareness about key issues and bring people closer to their food. Our vision is a healthy and just and sustainable food system in which all residents have access to and can afford to buy safe, nutritious, and culturally acceptable food that is produced in a sustainable way. To achieve this vision for a healthy food system, there is a need to carry out food system planning and to establish principles that govern food-related decisions. The Waterloo Region Food Charter defines a common vision and provides a foundation for food system training. Currently, our global food system is under threat. Climate change and growing populations are generally working against our ecosystems. Many of our basic agricultural assumptions are being challenged because of all the diverse factors. Please, next slide. So the Water of the Region Roundtable created a food charter. I will highlight some of the areas. Because we believe in a fair, environmentally sustainable, livable, and economically profitable rural and urban communities, we support community economic development by building the processing distribution infrastructure required to make local food available. We support, this includes prioritizing local processing, distribution, and retailing. We also support policies and other initiatives that enable profitable livelihood of local farmers. Next slide, please. We support access to healthy food by protecting farmland and urban development, by also supporting policies and other initiatives that ensure that everyone has access to nutritious food. Next slide, please. We also support ecological health by promoting and supporting food production and processing methods that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also ensures access to a safe and sustainable water supply for residents. Next slide. We also support integrated food policies at all levels of government by encouraging joint policies across local, provincial, and federal levels. We also recognize the importance of comprehensive food strategies and policies. Next slide. So as you've seen in the previous presentations, we are losing farmland at an extremely high rate for numerous reasons. Ontario has been facing a steady decline in its agricultural land base since the early 1970s. The total amount of land on farms in Ontario has decreased by 11.5% from 1986 to 2016. The amount of land actively in use for crops and pastures has also decreased by 8.9% over the same period, which is over 1 million acres. I want to make sure that the Wilmot Township knows that the land use of Wilmot Township is not only important to the township, but the region. People are looking to the township to ensure that you protect and increase accessibility of local food for our children, our grandchildren, all the children to come. We cannot afford to lose another acre of farmland. Next slide, please. We often hear that aggregate needs to be close to where the demand is. One of the reasons why aggregate companies and supporters say this is beneficial is because of having it close to market reduces the greenhouse gas emissions during transportation. Aggregate is often prioritized over farmlands, wetlands, and other areas that will be negatively impacted. Many people don't realize, but our food system is also responsible for a high amount of greenhouse gas emissions. One of the reasons why is because most of the time farms typically have to transport the food a long distance to the distribution or processing centers. Food security is increasing, food insecurity is increasing, or food security is increasing in priority because of climate change, the disruption of food being imported from other countries, as well as labor shortages. Focus is being put on creating localized food processing and distribution centers, as well as increasing farm-to-table options. Water of the Region's climate action policy and direction paper states that we need to maintain and build a robust agricultural system to protect and enable maximum use of agricultural land. Local food production, processing, and distribution is key to increasing resilience and self-sufficiency. This reduces energy use and emissions by reducing the length of trips from farms, processing facilities, grocery stores, or selling directly to homes and businesses. We need to choose food over aggregate. Food needs to be closer to our communities than aggregate. We can also see this in the Climate Action Water of the Region's draft strategy. Some of our township has helped to develop this strategy. And 5.1 states that we also need to protect our agricultural land and the local agricultural system, something we need to rely upon more locally as we protect. And then on top of that, there's another growing movement of organizers known as 50 by 30 Water of the Region that is pushing for even greater focus on prioritizing reducing of our greenhouse gases to reach the 50% reduction by 2030, but through a social justice lens, which includes prioritization of access to local healthy food. The next slide, please. The next two slides, I hope to highlight some areas where the Ontario government is setting priorities for the protection of farmland and water. And I hope this information will help support any future decisions by council. The Farms Forever discussion paper was drafted in 2017. However, the government's website was updated February 12th, 2021. The Ontario's government's website states, Farms Forever is our sector's blueprint for the future. It will be a resource as the government and industry work together to develop a new public policy that will enable the entire agricultural food chain to prepare for the third decade of the 21st century. It also highlights agriculture as one of the building blocks of our province, and it plays a critical role in our future. From an economic perspective, the ag food sector is one of the province's largest, contributing 36.4 billion to the Ontario's gross production plan. This paper, actually, I'm going to skip over this, and then go to the next slide, please. The Ontario on March 31st, 2021, the Ontario government changed the water taking program, which strengthens Ontario water protection, water resources. They set the priority as priority 1, environment, drinking water, and farm animal production. Examples of this is protection of streams, rivers, as well as protecting water levels in lakes and aquifers for the purpose of protecting aquatic ecosystems, including wetlands, and mitigating impacts of water quality degradation. This category would also include private domestic wells. Number 2 would be prioritizing agriculture. And the number 3, finally, is industrial and commercial land use, such as agriculture, or aggregate. So what you've heard in other presentations, and most likely in future presentations, the community of Shingletown and Waterloo Region are concerned with all the identified areas within priority 1 and 2 regarding the current aggregate application. The Ontario Water Resource, actually, I'm going to go to the next slide, please.
2 minutes.
Okay, additional municipal bylaws to consider. I have just identified a few ways that the Ontario government is prioritizing the protection of farmland and water. I'm hoping that our local council can reflect on the potential ways that they can protect these areas at the municipal level. We shouldn't just be reviewing and considering all these areas of concern when there's a threat identified, but instead we should be preemptive in our actions. We need to be doing stuff like conducting robust soil sample studies, formation of agricultural advisory committees, revising policies and development of mining for aggregate, addressing where it is appropriate, creating permanent agricultural districts, and placing limits on the quantity of farmland that is owned by individuals or entities located outside of Ontario. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. Our Food Future is a joint project from the University of Waterloo and the Food Systems Roundtable of Waterloo Region to bring the best from research in the community to inform our path towards food justice in the region. We would love the opportunity to talk more with council about the creation of agricultural and land use committee, or agricultural food and land use committee within Wilmot Township. A community food council examines how local food systems operates and provides policy recommendations to improve that system. Food charter is a great starting point for your community to do a local assessment of your local assessment of your resources and stakeholder needs. So I look forward to talking more with you guys and understanding how the Food Systems Roundtable or our Food Future can help you and support you.
Thank you, Stephen. So our next delegation is Laverne Forwell. Ms. Murray.
Mr. Forwell is no longer waiting to address council.
Thank you. Then we go to Clark Rick. Welcome, Clark.
Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me this evening and for staying awake. I haven't participated in one of these before, and I have more admiration than ever for everyone on the call. So thank you very much. As owner of Linden Fish Hatcheries, we have 2 sites. One is located at 1745 Huron Road, and then the adjacent property, 1738 Queen Street in New Dundee. We're concerned about the potential impact of the Holman pit on our livelihood as the impacts of the greater industry that we support. So we are a hatchery industry, so we produce 4 million rainbow trout every year, which the net result of that is about 24 million meals, the majority of which are enjoyed in Ontario. We invest heavily in the best use of water resources available to us and really stewarding that in a sustainable way out of respect for future generations. The pit has potential to not only impact the water table in the aquifer, but more importantly, due to the absence of an aquitard. So there's actually no lower layer of clay, which would be typical in a lot of the aggregate pits surrounding us, that there'd be an aquitard. That's actually how we have our access to our water resource for our farms to be able to operate on. There's really no restriction on contamination spread. So while this proposed pit may be more than a kilometer away from us, that doesn't mean that the impact of potential pollution would be limited to that geographical area. And our financiers actually have mandated that we would get insurance to be able to protect us in the event of an outside influence, such as cocoa paving or other. These are class 1 operating companies, but there's still a very realistic risk of contamination of our water, which is the entirety of our operation is dependent on that. So there'd be little chance of that contamination being retracted or having any sort of corrective action once it's actually in the watershed. So I recognize there's a need for aggregate, but I also would question and ask you, everybody involved in that decision-making process, to investigate that more thoroughly with the understanding that there really isn't a rewind button. There's no aquitard protecting you or the Waterloo region wells from the seepage or contamination that would be involved. And I wasn't aware of this project specifically until once I was made aware of it and did some more research. I did see that it had a fairly significant potential impact on our operation. And with so many other gravel pits within a very close geographical range, most of which have the ability to draw below the water table, it's just another area where our business and livelihood is exposed. And especially with an outside organization that isn't necessarily concerned about the community's best well-being, most likely a shareholder interest would be their primary decision-making process and their moral compass on that. Those are areas that are of significant concern to myself and our staff and their families, but also the 24 million meals that we try and contribute to on an annual basis. So I wanted to thank each and every one of the councillors, as well as yourself, Mayor, for your investment in this process. And so thank you for the time and energy you're putting into it. And I just ask that you make a decision that would allow for whether it's something that's staged or something that can be undone. But when I did realize the significant environmental exposure, when we had to get our permits to take water, there was a significant amount of investment required for that. And I'm just hopeful that that investment just for our small operation is magnified when you look at something like an aggregate pit. So thank you for your time this evening, and appreciate your contributions.
Thank you, Clark. Okay. That is our final speaker for the evening. So the next item is our confirmatory bylaw. And the recommendation that bylaw number 2021-22 to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held on April 12th, 2021 be introduced, read a first, second, and third time, and finally passed in open council. And Miss Murray.
Sorry, my apologies for interrupting. Mr. Forwell had just called me and said he is waiting for us. So we'll just get him his opportunity to speak.
Yes, we will do that. If he's ready, we're ready.
Just one moment.
Thank you.
Sorry, we're just trying to solve another little technical issue, and hopefully we can get Mr. Forwell back in a moment.
We certainly just appreciate everyone's display of patience.
I'm passing the time in reading the provincial policy statement on land use.
Good for you. Yes.
Hi, just for the delegate who was just removed, he'll have to rejoin with a different email address, unfortunately, because he was removed because we didn't know who he was because he was identifying himself not by his name. I don't know if there's a way to communicate that with him, but we'd have to stop the entire meeting and then restart again to get him to come back in. So this hurdle, I don't think we'll get over with that easily.
Well, we certainly don't want to do that because we could lose more.
Is it possible for him to join by phone?
Yep, he could join by phone, or he can just use a fake email. Just pretend something. If the clerks can communicate that with him, that might work.
Mr. Forwell is being contacted as we speak, or as I speak.
I was able to reach him and he's going to call in. So be with us momentarily.
Thank you very much.
when he does join, *6 is how he unmutes himself.
Well, it should come up showing a.
You see him, but he's not there yet.
Hmm.
So it looks like Mr. Forwell is having some issues getting back in with us. So I would leave it to the chair if we wish to continue on, if before we adjourn, Mr. Forwell does join us. However, if he wishes to make a written submission, we'd be more than welcome to receive that and include it in the minutes, with our apologies, of course, that for this technical issue. I would like to remind anyone out there who is planning on being a delegation in the future that it's very important that you use your name when signing into Zoom, so that we know who you are, and that we know that you're supposed to be a delegation in our meetings. So, Mr. Mayor, I will leave it to you if you wish to hold on a little bit longer, or if you wish to continue with the rest of the meeting.
Well, I think we should, we can give a couple more minutes, but we could maybe pass the bylaw to fill the time, or technically not, right? So we can't do that. If council is willing to wait a couple of minutes, we could maybe do a thumb twirling contest or something. It's unfair to offer up a competition without opportunity to practice, so we'll forego that.
If anyone has any unusual party tricks they want to share, I'll give it to you.
No, we won't do that. So I will say we'll give till 10 after 10, and then at that point we will call it off. And well, that's our 10 after, so we will continue. I've read the motion for the recommendation for the bylaws. We need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Gorick, second by Councillor Hallman. All in favor? That is carried. Next one is a recommendation that we do now adjourn to meet again at the call of the mayor. Moved by everybody. Councillor Gordick, Councillor Fenning. All in favor? One hand at a time, only one hand. All right, thank you. Appreciate your patience, everyone.